When I was in elementary school, during Black History Month, my teachers would always mention how Booker T. Washington was one of the great African Americans in U.S. history. But if your elementary school experience was anything like mine, they never actually expounded beyond that. Half of you probably think he invented peanut butter. Well, I'm here to backfill the education that your teachers skipped. Booker T. Washington was born in 1856 in Franklin County, Virginia, as a slave on a plantation. His original birth name was Booker Taliaferro. Taliaferro wasn't his surname or anything. At that time, slaves didn't have last names. Growing up, he went by Booker for short. His mother was a slave named Jane, and his father was an unknown slave owner from the local area. He had two siblings, an older brother named John and a younger half-sister named Amanda. Booker's childhood was a little rough. He grew up in a log cabin with a dirt floor. His bed was a bundle of filthy rags on the floor. His diet was mostly sweet potatoes, cornbread, and pork. Once a week he got 2 tablespoons of molasses, which was considered a real treat. During his time as a slave, he was too young to really do much work in the fields. His work consisted of carrying water to the men in the fields or taking corn to the mill to be ground into meal. Somebody once asked Booker what sports and pastimes he engaged in as a youth. Booker writes in his biography, "Until that question was asked, it had never occurred to me that there was no period of my life that was devoted to play." In 1865, when he was 9 years old, the Civil War ended and he was freed from slavery. That same year, Booker, his siblings, and his mother all moved to West Virginia to be with his stepdad, Washington Ferguson. His stepfather had found work in Malden, West Virginia, working in the salt furnaces. After Booker arrived, his stepfather got him a job so he could help support the family. Booker didn't want work, though. He wanted to go to school. For a while, he had an arrangement with the school teacher to teach him lessons at night after work, and there was even a short period where his stepfather allowed him to attend school during the day, as long as he worked before and after school started. Even during that period of time when his father allowed him to attend school, Booker was still unsatisfied because he would get out of work at the same time that school was starting, but after traveling to the schoolhouse, he was late. At one point, he even set the clock at work forward half an hour so he could be on time, but eventually the boss discovered the clock had been tampered with and locked the clock in a case. While attending school, his teacher asked him for his full name. Booker didn't have a last name, and in that moment he decided his name would be Booker Washington. Unfortunately, Booker's initial schooling came to an abrupt halt when his father decided he needed him to start working days again. His thirst for knowledge had not been quenched, though. One day, while working in some nearby coal mines, he overheard 2 miners talking about a school in Virginia that would allow black students to enroll, and would also help them work to pay for the cost of their tuition and board. This school was called the Hampton Normal and Agricultural Institute. After hearing this, Booker resolved that he had to get to that school. Booker hated working in the coal mines because it was dangerous work and he often heard about other miners being injured or killed, so he decided to look for a different job. The next year or so, he worked as a house servant for Mrs. Viola Ruffner, the wife of a retired Union general. She was very strict and held Booker to a high standard. She would not tolerate any uncleanliness and wanted things done promptly and systematically. This job would go on to be a great blessing for Booker because it taught him how to work hard as well as deliver quality results. In the fall of 1872, Booker was finally able to leave Malden and struck out for the Hampton Institute in Southern Virginia. The distance from Malden to Hampton was about 500 miles. On top of that, he only had a couple dollars saved up for the trip. He was able to walk and beg for rides all the way to Richmond, at which point he ran out of money. The night he arrived in Richmond, he had no money to stay anywhere and ended up sleeping under an elevated board sidewalk. Booker woke up the next morning, determined to get some money so he could complete his journey to Hampton. He met a ship captain who let him work unloading pig iron from his ship. Booker worked for him for a number of days, saving up money while sleeping under the sidewalk at night to save on lodging. Once he had enough money, he completed the final stretch of his journey. Upon arriving at the Hampton Institute, Booker did his best to convince the head teacher, Miss Mary F. Mackey, to let him enroll. He must not have made a good impression because for a long time she didn't reject him, but she also didn't say that he could enroll either. She probably had no idea that this guy had traveled 500 miles and slept under a sidewalk just to get there. To add to his anxiety, while Booker was waiting, she admitted other students into the school. After a while, she told Booker that the recitation room needed to be swept and that he should sweep it. Booker T. Washington was pretty good at picking up hints and realized that this was probably a test. Using all the skills he learned while working as a house servant, he swept the room 3 times and then dusted 4 times. He cleaned that room so thoroughly that when the head teacher came to inspect, she could not find a speck of dust anywhere. After seeing such work ethic and determination, she immediately admitted him. Not only was he admitted, but Miss Mackey offered him a position as a janitor to help him pay for his education. Booker's time at the Hampton Institute was both exhausting and rewarding. He had to wake up at 4 a.m. just to prepare for his lessons, but he also had to work late into the night as a janitor to pay for his schooling. The Hampton Institute was more than just a place to learn how to read and write. It was meant to transform the students into functional members of society. In addition to academic work, students were instilled with habits such as making a bed, shining shoes, brushing teeth, and bathing regularly. The principal of the Hampton Institute was a former Union officer named General S.C. Armstrong. Booker has referred to General Armstrong as the rarest, strongest, and most beautiful character that it has ever been my privilege to meet. He had so much respect for General Armstrong that when the general asked for volunteers to sleep in a tent during the winter in order to allow more students to enroll at the school, Booker volunteered despite the freezing temperatures. The duo would go on to develop such a close relationship that the general spent 2 of the last 6 months of his life at Booker's home. While at the Hampton Institute, Booker learned plenty of academic knowledge and life skills. However, the greatest lesson Booker learned came from observing the teachers tirelessly helping the students. From this he learned that those who are happiest are those who do the most to help others. Booker graduated in 1875 at age 19, and after a brief stint working as a waiter in Connecticut, he returned to his hometown in Malden, where he became a teacher. Not only did he teach during the day, but he also opened a night school for those who had to work. He even helped his brother John get accepted into the Hampton Institute. Booker taught in Malden for 2 years before moving to Washington, D.C. for a year of study. After that, he was invited to become a teacher at the Hampton Institute, where he also started a night school program. In May 1881, Booker T. Washington would begin his life's work. General Armstrong had received a letter from Tuskegee, Alabama, requesting that they send a teacher to help start a normal school for the African Americans down there. General Armstrong asked Booker to go, and Booker accepted. When he got to Alabama, there was no schoolhouse, no teaching supplies, and hundreds of former slaves eager to learn. With no schoolhouse, they ended up using an old shack and a deteriorated Methodist church to meet. When it rained, one of the students would hold an umbrella over Booker because the roof leaked so badly. After he began teaching in Tuskegee, Booker began looking for a more suitable location for the school. An abandoned plantation in the town was up for sale for only $500, but Booker had no money to buy it and no credit to borrow with. The owner of the land said that if they could just put down $250 and pay the rest within a year, they could have it, but that was still too much. Booker wrote the Hampton Institute for help, and the treasurer personally lent him $250 of his own money. After purchasing the land, they converted the stable and hen house into recitation rooms. They couldn't utilize the main plantation house because it had been burned. Next, they cleared 20 acres of land so they could plant crops. Booker's vision for this school was similar to the Hampton Institute. He wanted it to be a place where students learned both academic and practical skills. He wanted to educate the people of the South both on how to read and how to be better farmers and tradesmen. After converting the stable and hen house, Booker's next goal was to build a large facility for the main campus. Booker drafted up plans for a building, but it was estimated to cost $6,000. Members of the local community, both black and white, helped contribute to this. His wife, Olivia Davidson, engaged in most of the fundraising while Booker dealt with the actual construction. Booker had the students learn to do construction, and it became a tradition at Tuskegee for students to help construct all the buildings. One of the most difficult parts in constructing their school buildings was brick making. The town of Tuskegee did not have a brickyard, so Booker decided that they should make their own. This would allow them to not only supply their own construction projects with bricks, but also give an opportunity to teach students the trade of brickmaking and allow the school to raise funds by selling bricks to the town. On their first attempt at making bricks, they molded the bricks, but their kiln didn't work, so they built a second kiln. That one didn't work either. After that, Booker enlisted the help of some Hampton graduates who had experience in the brickmaking industry, and they built a third kiln. Bricks take about a week to cook, but after being in the third kiln for just a number of days, the kiln fell. At this point, Booker was out of money and couldn't afford to build a fourth kiln. Instead of giving up, he went to Montgomery, pawned his watch for $15, and they tried a fourth time. In this case, the fourth time was the charm. Over the next couple decades, Booker would continue growing the school by adding more facilities and taking on more students. The school was a rigorous institution and could transform people with no education into productive members of society. Here is a daily schedule of what the students at Tuskegee had to adhere to. Over time, the reputation of the school grew, as did Booker's own personal reputation. One of the most significant events of Booker T. Washington's life happened in 1895. That year, he was invited to speak at the Atlanta Exposition. The Atlanta Exposition was a convention designed to promote the American South to the world and showcase its products and new technologies. No African American had ever been invited to speak at this exposition before. Booker gave a powerful speech that encouraged African Americans to work hard and learn skills that would help them become self-sufficient. At the same time, he urged the white people to give the black community a chance and to help them. Here is an actual recording of Booker T. Washington giving the beginning of this speech. The recording was not actually taken at the Atlanta Exposition, but was made years later in 1908 and is the only known recording of his voice.
Mr. President and gentlemen of the Board of Directors and citizens, 1/3 of the population of the South is of the Negro race. No enterprise seeking the material, civil, or moral welfare of this section can disregard this element of our population and reach the highest success.
This speech was initially well received, but then later many African Americans believed he was too soft on the white race with his admonitions. After the Atlanta Exposition, Booker went back to Alabama and continued his work at the Tuskegee Institute for another 20 years, incrementally improving the school. Today, the Tuskegee Institute is known as Tuskegee University, and it's not only accredited, but also one of the most respected schools in the South. Booker died of congestive heart failure on November 14, 1915, at age 59. I personally believe Booker T. Washington to be one of the most underrated role models in American history, and he was an incredibly humble and generous man. This video was based on Booker T. Washington's autobiography, Up From Slavery. Thanks for watching.